we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
Well, I'm proud to have that German blood. There's no question about it. Great stuff.
You believe in genes? Some do, some don't. But I had an uncle who was a professor at MIT. Believe me, if it's good genes, we believe in genes, right? We're allowed to say that. Do we believe in the gene thing? I mean, I do, right? You know, I do.
Modern population genetics has demolished the biological foundations of racial supremacy with a clarity that leaves no room for serious scientific disagreement. The human species is genetically remarkably homogeneous compared to other great apes. All living human beings are descendants of a relatively small ancestral population that left Africa within the last 200,000 years. The total genetic variation among humans is less than the variation found within chimpanzee populations in a single region of Africa. We are, genetically speaking, a young and closely related species. Most decisively for the race question, research consistently shows that there is substantially more genetic variation within so-called racial groups than between them. Richard Lewontin's landmark 1972 analysis, confirmed by every subsequent major genomic study, found that approximately 85 to 90% of human genetic variation occurs within racial or ethnic groups, with only 10 to 15% occurring between them. This means that two randomly selected people from the same racial group will, on average, be more genetically different from each other than either is from a randomly selected person from a different racial group. Race does not carve human genetic variation at its natural joints. The specific traits most commonly invoked by racial supremacists, including skin color, hair texture, and facial features, are among the most superficial and recent of human variations, driven by adaptations to local climate and UV radiation over relatively short evolutionary timescales. They are skin-deep in the most literal sense. They do not correlate with any significant underlying biological differences in cognition, capacity, or potential. No study in the history of genetics or neuroscience has produced credible evidence of inherent cognitive differences between racial or ethnic groups that are not explained by environmental, social, and historical factors. Race, as it is commonly understood and deployed, is not a biological category but a social, historical, and political construction. This is not a controversial claim in contemporary social science or biology. It is the mainstream, well-evidenced consensus. The racial categories used in everyday discourse are not natural kinds discovered by scientists. They are classifications invented and repeatedly revised for political purposes. The history of racial classification is instructive. The boundaries of who counts as white in the United States, for example, have shifted dramatically over the past 2 centuries. Irish, Italian, Jewish, and Polish immigrants were all at various points classified as non-white or racially suspect, and were later reclassified as white as political and economic conditions changed. This is not how natural categories behave. No one reclassifies gold as non-metallic when it is politically convenient. The social construction of race does not mean that race is not real in its social effects. Racial discrimination, racial hierarchy, and race-based violence are devastatingly real. But it does mean that race has no stable biological referent that could ground supremacist claims about inherent worth. The category itself is built on shifting political sand, and any doctrine of worth built upon it inherits that instability. The supremacist worldview rests in part on a selective reading of history. The achievements of a favored civilization are presented as evidence of that civilization's inherent superiority, while the contributions, achievements, and prior sophistication of other civilizations are minimized, erased, or dismissed. The historical record, examined without this filter, tells a radically different story. Every major civilization in human history achieved what it achieved through exchange, synthesis, borrowing, and building on the contributions of others. Ancient Greek philosophy, mathematics, and science drew heavily on Egyptian, Babylonian, and Persian predecessors. The Islamic Golden Age preserved and extended Greek learning while making independent advances in algebra, optics, medicine, and astronomy that were decisive for the later European Renaissance. The Renaissance itself was partly enabled by the transmission of Islamic scholarship through Spain and Sicily. No civilization achieved greatness in isolation. Every claim to exclusive civilizational credit requires the erasure of contributions from others. The history of human achievement is, on sober examination, a history of human collaboration across the boundaries that supremacists wish to treat as absolute barriers. Empirical psychology has illuminated the psychological origins of supremacist belief in ways that further undermine its epistemic legitimacy. Decades of research on in-group and out-group psychology, implicit bias, and authoritarian personality suggest that supremacist beliefs arise not from evidence, but from deep psychological needs, for certainty, for belonging, for the management of anxiety, for the maintenance of self-esteem under conditions of insecurity. Henry Tajfel's social identity theory demonstrated that human beings naturally favor their in-group and disfavor out-groups, and that this favoritism does not require any substantive reason. It emerges even when group membership is assigned arbitrarily. The minimal group paradigm experiments showed that people discriminate in favor of their group even when the groups were formed by coin flip, and there is no history, no competition, and no meaningful difference between them. This research does not excuse supremacist belief. It explains its psychological persistence in a way that does nothing to justify it. The fact that tribalism is a natural cognitive tendency is not an argument for tribalism. It is an argument for critical self-examination of our tribalistic tendencies. The claim that supremacist belief is natural is an instance of the naturalistic fallacy, the inference from what is to what ought to be. That we have tendencies toward in-group favoritism is a reason to be vigilant against them, not a reason to indulge them.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
You know, I'm proud to have that German blood. There's no question about it. Great stuff.
You believe in genes? Some do, some don't. But I had an uncle who was a professor at MIT. Believe me, if it's good genes, we believe in genes, right? We're allowed to say that. Do we believe in the gene thing? I mean, I do, right? You know, I do.